How's everyone doing? The last talk? No, come on, show me more energy. Come on! Woo! 30 more minutes and you're all free. All right. All right. So everyone was telling stories today. It was starting with stories. So I'm going to also tell you mine. One day, I was sitting at my desk, working, coding, vibing in my zone. And suddenly, I started receiving messages from people, from product, asking me about metrics. Some people asking me about some release dates, some deadlines, some OKRs. And this is where it hit me. I was overwhelmed. And somehow I stopped thinking about the code I was writing, and all I was thinking about OKRs and numbers. What is that? So if this ever happened to you, I will tell you one thing. Stop, pause, step back, and breathe for a moment. Code was never about numbers and metrics. I know a product manager might come after me for this, but hear me out. What if we took a moment just to appreciate the beauty around us? And I'm not just talking about this beautiful landscape. I don't know if this is in Switzerland, but probably. But I'm also talking about code itself. That's why today we'll be discovering a new form of beauty, a new form of art, the art of code. But before we do so, hello everyone. My name is Yara Debian. I am Lebanese and I currently live in sunny Barcelona. I'm a software engineer at Factorial, and this is my first time in Switzerland, and I'm loving it so far. All right, so you're probably thinking, what the hell is she talking about? And I get it. I'm no art expert. I'm no artist in the traditional way. But like many of us, we all experienced art in one way or another. Being from drawing in kindergarten, or listening to some music, to some songs, like Temple of Love, or maybe going to museums. We all had our exposure to art, so somehow we formed our collective knowledge of what art is. And we can recognize it when we see it. And this is what we'll be basing our analogy on today. And to make this analogy come to life, we'll be creating a mini art gallery application, at least some parts of it, because we only have 30 minutes. But first, we need to get inspired. So let's get inspired. I'm gonna just check my clicker first. Okay. This is the famous Sistine Chapel ceiling by Michelangelo. If you haven't seen it in the Vatican, I highly recommend it. It's a masterpiece. It's beautiful. But what really inspires me about it is how the ceiling is structured. You can see that it has many components, and each component is formed of other components, and they all live together in harmony. They form like a bigger emotion, bigger story, even though each component by itself, it tells its own story. And this is how Michelangelo started. He started from an empty canvas, an empty ceiling. He decided on his components, where to place them, where they're gonna be, which story each one is gonna tell, and how they're gonna live together in harmony. And this is how we also start. We start from an empty file, and we decide on a lot of things before we start coding. So to do that for my art gallery application, I'm gonna start with deciding on what my components are. So it's an art gallery application, so for sure I have some artworks. And I'm gonna have some artists that created these artworks. Also, they can belong to movements. And I will have some users that will interact with my application, maybe. And they can create some galleries, or they can create some bookings to view some artworks in some museums. So here the options are endless, but we're gonna keep it as simple as possible. Now that I have my structure planned, I can go and create my tables. So my schema would look like something like this. Some tables for the art movements, someone for the artworks, and also for the artists. And here also I can reflect the relationship between them. So I start with an empty file, but what happens next? Some artists start sketching their painting. They start deciding on the components where to place them, how they're gonna interact with each other, what importance each component is gonna have. So they keep iterating and doing a lot of changes until they get to the last one, which is this beautifully AI-generated oil on canvas. So, and this is what we do. This is what we call the iterative process. We're probably familiar with it in coding. So my sketches are gonna be also this way. So I'm gonna create some sketches for my flow, for my application flow. It could be something really simple, like the user being able to view some movements, maybe some biography about the artist, and some details about the artwork itself. Also, it can be more complicated, like creating a booking request where the user can view some artwork in a museum, and also maybe some recommendation mechanism where I can recommend artworks for the user based on what they're viewing, and also maybe some gallery sharing and gallery creation by users. So, on another note, what does this painting make you feel? Well, don't answer all at the same time, please, but. So this painting can have different impact on the audience. Maybe it can give you this feeling of uneasiness or like a lot of chaos happening here, a lot of colors, a lot of shapes, like some kind of clash. And it's probably due to a lot of factors. And one of these factors is some art principles that the artist takes into consideration. So some of these art principles, they can be the symmetry, the color wheel, the color coordination using the color wheel, and also the perspective. So our principles were created for a reason, because they help the painting become more visually balanced and appealing. And also they help the artist decide on what kind of impact it's gonna leave on the audience. So same way we have principles in art, we also have principles and rules in code. I know sometimes these rules can be restricting for us or make us feel that it's limiting our creativity, but I personally believe that if you didn't have a box, you cannot really think outside it. That's how I like to see it. So some of these principles, we have the single responsibility principle from Solid. If you're not familiar with it, it states that every class or service must have one functionality or one role, and it should make sense by its own. So this is something really simple to represent that, like my artist model here, where all the validation that happens for the artist attributes happen inside this class. And same for the artwork, for example. Now, another principle I want to talk about in art is context. Check out these two paintings by Vermeer. You can see that he masterfully played with shadows and contrast here. Like the one here on the left, the maid, you can see that half of her body is lit and the rest is in the shadows. And that's due to this source of light, the window here that you can see on her right. And same for the girl with the pearl earring. You can see half of her face is lit and the rest is in the shadows. And that was intentional. So here Vermeer didn't just focus on the subjects themselves, he also took into consideration all their factors, how they're gonna look like based on everything they're surrounding them. So same in coding, we must always think about any method I create, any class, any service, where I'm gonna use it, how much I'm gonna use it, what I'm gonna be passing as parameters, how it's gonna scale over time. So a lot of factors I need to take into consideration that might help me with my development process. So to take an example here, I have a related artwork. This method is gonna just get an artwork and return some recommended artwork based on many criteria. It could be the artist, or by movement, or by year. So you see just basic filters here that I'm doing. And this is fine. So the user, every time they view an artwork, they're gonna get a list of recommended ones. But the problem here is just a business problem. Imagine I'm a user and I get recommended some artworks. I won't really know based on which criteria it was recommended for me. So to solve that, I'm gonna create like a conditional way to do it. So based on the type that I have, I can call my filter or my logic for get the recommended artwork. So if it was an artist, I'm calling the filter of artist. For the movement, I'm calling the one of movement, and etc. So now what happens? In my main method here, the related artworks, I'm calling this service, and I'm passing the type that I want, anywhere I want this recommendation to happen. But here's the catch. Let's suppose now it's real life, and we don't just have 3 criteria for an artwork, we have much more. So imagine every time I'm gonna have a new criteria to add, a new recommendation type, I'm gonna go back to this service here, and I'm gonna add a new line with a new condition and a new filter. So imagine with time where I have 100 criteria, for example, like color, dimension, a lot of things. Every time I'm gonna have to touch this one, and I'm sure I will break it, for sure. with time, because no one is perfect. So this is where our job comes, is finding solution, trying to make this more scalable, more robust with time, and easier to maintain. But this solution won't be magic, like this flower here, this rose. You can see that it takes it many layers to get to its final shape, its final state. So in art, we iterate, we refine, and we make a lot of changes over time until we get to our final output. This is one of the techniques. This is not all every time used, but it's one of the techniques that we can mention. So let's try to do that. I'm going to create a recommendation strategy method, and it's going to implement a find method. It's going to be here abstract. And I'm going to create some children classes. So they're going to inherit from the parent one, and each one is going to implement its own logic of filtering, of recommending an artwork. So now what happens every time I have a new art criteria, I don't have to touch anymore my main service, and I can just create a class for it and maintain it by itself. So if one criteria breaks, I know that my system is still strong enough to hold. So now in my art recommendation service, I can initialize this class that I just created, and I can pass it. And this is my first layer. Now, let's try to make it a bit better. Let's try to make it a bit more scalable, maybe more automatic. So I'm gonna create a method called register. I'm gonna make it a bit more Ruby-ish. So what will this one do? Every time a children class inherits from recommendation strategy, I'm gonna call this register, and this way I can keep track of all my classes. So every time now I have a class that I'm adding a new criteria, I will look for it. I will check that it's registered for me, and if not, I know which error I'm gonna get because I'm defining it myself. And if it finds it, it's gonna initialize it for me, and then it's gonna call the implemented find method inside it. So now in my main method, when I call this service, I don't need any more to initialize my class. I can just pass the type, being artist or movement or anything I defined. And this is my second layer. Now, let's try one more time. I'm gonna add a method called inherited. And what does this inherited do? So every time a class inherits from my recommendation strategy, I won't have to call anymore this register. So yay, less work for me. And it's gonna, again, try to find this class, the one that I registered, and initialize it, and then call the find method. And this is my third layer. So enough with the coding. I know everyone is tired. It was a long day. I want to talk about something else, about art and its movements. So throughout history, we've seen a lot of changes in humanity and society, also in art. And I like to believe that there is a strong relationship between them, because all these changes affected a lot the way we think, the way we view things. So same way we have movements in art, I also think we have movements in code. So one of these movements is prehistoric art. It was the first forms of art that the humanity saw. It was just basic shapes and tools on cave walls. You can see it was pretty raw, but for its time, it was powerful, because it was the origin of everything that followed it, every creation, artistic creation that followed it. And same way we have prehistoric art, we have prehistoric code. So it was also pretty basic, pretty raw. Now I cannot do this. I remember doing it in university for like 2 months, and then I gave up. So yeah, we can remember assembly. I mean, it's still the base of a lot of systems that we know today. So even though it was pretty raw and basic, but it's still powerful. Another movement I want to talk about is Renaissance. And when you think of Renaissance, we think of development, revolution, innovation, challenging a lot of old ideologies. So Renaissance was powerful, and artists like Da Vinci, they left a huge impact on our societies until today. And speaking of big impact, what bigger impact than the internet of today? So the 1980s and 90s saw the birth of programming languages like C++ and Java, also powerful systems like Windows and macOS, and a lot of other, and also the birth of web. so that we still use today and changed our lives. That's why we are able to do this presentation today. Another movement I want to mention is Baroque. And when we say Baroque, we think of, intensity, drama, all over the top execution, a lot of details. And when I think of that, I remember these 2000s websites. They were, definition of intensity and drama. You can see like all this glittery text and movements and animation. They were more about design more than efficiency itself, but they did the job. So it's pure Baroque vibe for me. And last movement I want to mention is pop art. If you don't know what pop art is, it's known by being super bold and bright, and it depicts daily life scenes from our daily lives, and sometimes a bit mixed with surrealism. But also when I think of pop art, I remember our open source initiative and a lot of coding platforms and a lot of tools that emerged that helped us create and share code and mass produce it. So same way pop art was shared, the creation process became much smoother, and you didn't have to be an elite artist to create. It's the same case for us, especially with low code platforms. So far, we've seen a lot of similarities between art and code, like rules, creativity, principles, movements. But with all of that, what can we really learn from art? First lesson. Let's stay minimal, let's appreciate, let's embrace minimalism. Minimalism is not for everyone. We struggle to understand it sometimes, it's a bit controversial. But the minimalist artist, Carl Andre, says that art is the exclusion of the unnecessary. So remember that not everything complex means better, and sometimes the solution is so simple that we can't even see it. Another principle is to implement more of negative space. So this painting, the famous case by Klimt, you can see that he left a lot of space in the painting empty. And that was intentional, because this way we can focus on the two people in the center. And we won't be distracted by any other details. So let's suppose the audience here is not the person viewing this painting, but is the consumer of this create method. So this one, what it does is get some parameters to create an artwork, and it creates it. These parameters can be the title, the description, the year, anything we want. And the problem here is that suppose I try to, call this method, and instead of passing a number for the year, I'm passing a string, and it's gonna fail. But when it's gonna fail when it tries to save the artwork. So the database will be like, you cannot do this. I cannot accept the string as a year. So here, I'm gonna try to make the audience, which is my consumer, focus less on the validation. I'm gonna do it myself. So I'm gonna try to parse these parameters myself, and check for the types, define each type for this parameter. And now when I try to extract it, if any parameter doesn't match the type that I want, it's gonna fail even before it tries to save it in the database. This way, I'm reducing the noise, I'm reducing the effort of the consumer having to check for types, and I'm doing it myself. Another lesson we can learn from art is attention to details. Check out this beautiful painting by Da Vinci. So you can see she's amazing, she's gorgeous. But what really makes this painting show-stopping is this tree behind her, is the amount of details that this tree has. It actually makes people stop at the museum to view it. So let's suppose I want to create tests now, not with RSpec, because I'm scared of you, Ronan, now. But I'm gonna create it in a different way. But what my test will have? So it will have the happy path where, okay, if my artwork has the same artist, gonna be returned. If it has the same movement, same way, and same for the period. But if I take a deeper look, I'm gonna notice that I have a lot of edge cases that I didn't really think about. Like, what if I have a lot of related artworks? How I'm gonna handle, like, what if it's a large data set? How many I'm gonna return? 5, 10, 100? We don't know. What if I get nothing? What I'm gonna return for the consumer? And what if I pass a wrong type, for example? What error I should expect? So a lot of things can be taken into consideration when we pay one extra attention to details. Another lesson is to stay flexible Art can be flexible too in a lot of techniques, like the oil technique, where if you prep your Canva in a really good way, you can make a lot of changes with time and it won't really ruin it for you. So an example to that, do you remember my recommendation filters that I did before? So I did a small homework and I added them as scopes here. So instead of having to call the filter there in my class, I'm calling it here in my model. And every time I need to filter by year, I can filter it here. And why am I doing this? I'm doing this because suppose I want to have now the art gallery, and I want to group my artwork by period, for example. So instead of having to call this artwork also this filter also there, I can just reuse my scope here. So here, this recommendation, the one that I had before, instead of calling the filter, I'm calling now my scope. And a change of scenario, for example. Let's suppose now I decide that, okay, when I want to recommend an artwork by period, it's not going to match the same period for me. It's going to be a 10 years interval. Because let's be real, it's hard to find two artwork from the same year. Usually it's more of a interval. So let's suppose I have 10 years now, the period. I want to recommend it. If I had my filters everywhere in the application, I'm going to have to go and change them one by one. But since I have my scope, I can just do it here. And this way, it's going to be applied everywhere. So this way, I kept my code flexible, more scalable, maybe more open to changes in the future. So since we're talking about lessons, about techniques that we can learn from art, also we can learn how to create and create with impact. So artists, when they create, they're creating for themselves from some personal experience, from some struggles maybe. But what makes a painting really powerful or a piece of art really powerful is also the impact it leaves on the audience. So make sure whenever you create something, what kind of impact is it leaving? And try to make it as positive as possible. So to consider that, always consider the audience. This is a Canadian artist, Rob Gonsalves. I really love his paintings, and I advise you to check him out. But what Rob does is optical illusions in his work, and you can see that he mixes realism with surrealism together, and he really tries to make you think, because his topics are a bit controversial, and he likes to represent that. Now, imagine the audience doesn't really see the optical illusions. I don't know, do you see it? Okay, great. Imagine the audience doesn't really see the optical illusion. His piece would be missing something, because this is what it's all about for him, mixing surrealism with realism. And same applies when we create something. Also, when we paint a code, we should always think of the audience, like the user flow, the accessibility. What about the design? Maybe we're not designing ourselves, but we should always have an eye for design, being in the user's shoes. Also, testing the application, testing the security. So, also getting a lot of feedback, as the previous speakers mentioned. So, a lot of things should be taken into consideration regarding the audience when we create something. And lastly, oh yeah, this is a slide just appreciation for Rob Gonsalves. So again, please check him out. And yeah, speaking of impact, I also want to talk about emotional impact. So Claude Monet is a French impressionist, and you can see his paintings are happy paintings. It's usually like a breezy day of spring or summer. You can see he doesn't have a lot of details, but it's just brush strokes. This is what impressionism is about. But overall, it creates this impact of happiness, of calm, of serenity. And this is what we should aim to try to create in our work, because maybe one error won't really affect the user impression on it, but an accumulation of errors, of slowness, of big latency can really affect and can really trigger the user. And same the opposite way. Maybe one good behavior, one feature won't really change it, but an accumulation of good behavior, good features, like more responsiveness, less latency, less errors, can really create this good impact for the user and makes them feel like they belong in a Monet painting. So after everything we've seen, Remember that every line of code you create is more than just a technical task. And same way artists, shape experiences with their brushes, we also shape experiences with our code. So the next time you're sitting at your desk, if you're feeling overwhelmed or uninspired or unmotivated, remember me standing on this stage, telling you to pause, stop, take a step back, and remember that you're creating something powerful. Remember to have fun, and remember that you are artists. Thank you.